An American Caesar, General Douglas MacArthur looms large over the city of Norfolk. His memorial occupies what was once City Hall. A commanding presence during the Japanese surrender 80 years ago, MacArthur exuded newly established American power on a shifting world stage. Now, we examine General Douglas MacArthur as part of our history through the lens. Hi, I'm Tom Schaad with another edition of History Through the Lens, and I'm sitting here at the MacArthur Memorial, the Visitor Center in downtown Norfolk, and I'm joined by James Zobel. He is the archivist here, if I'm saying that correctly, archivist,
right?
And he's been kind enough to join us today. We're talking about the 80th anniversary, it's been that long, of the Japanese surrender to the Allied forces in World War II, and of course, General Douglas MacArthur presided over that ceremony, and he has great ties to Norfolk. And tell me about MacArthur's legacy in Hampton Roads before we even start. Like, how did he become synonymous with Norfolk?
His mom was from Norfolk. He used to come here as a boy and would spend summers here. They owned a house that was right across the Elizabeth River on the south side, right where the Berkeley Bridge goes across. And that was the old Hardy homestead. And so she grew up here, but after the Civil War, she married Arthur MacArthur, who is, they called the boy colonel of the Civil War. And he was a very well-known Union officer. All her sisters married Union officers, or Yankees, so to speak, because they wanted to get out of Norfolk because it was so depressing at the end. But MacArthur would come here as a boy with his brothers, and then in 1951, after he got fired by Truman, he was making a tour of the United States, and Norfolk invited him to come back. And when he came back, he gave a speech at the old Monticello Hotel, right, and said, I feel like I finally come home. Because he recognized it from when he was a kid. Norfolk hadn't changed that much, since he had been a small boy.
Before renewal took over.
Right. And so he recognized, pretty much the place that his mom was from, and he had a very sentimental connection to that. And the mayor picked up on it at that time. And so when the City Hall became empty because they were making the new City Hall where it is now today, they offered MacArthur the position of having this as a memorial to him.
Really, that's so cool. How could you turn that down, that beautiful historic building with the dome?
I think he realized that there was no other offer he was going to get that was like that, because it really is a unique place to be buried there, have all your stuff there in a museum, have all your archival materials there. It's probably the closest thing to a presidential library he was going to get at that time.
Wow, and that was something, because he's probably, would you say, the most famous general, would you say, of the 20th century at least?
He's definitely one of them. I don't know if you'd say the most famous, but he's definitely up there in the top 3 or 4, I would say.
Well, I just have a little quote here. This is from the ceremony itself aboard USS Missouri, and he was very dramatic. He had like a flair for the dramatic. I guess, did he write this as well? He wrote,
sure, yes.
Today the guns are silent, a great tragedy is ended, a great victory has been won, the skies no longer rain death, the seas bear only commerce men, everywhere walk upright in the sunlight, the entire world is quietly at peace, the holy mission has been completed. I mean, when you hear him, he had this, it was almost like an evangelical quality when he talked about war.
Yes, and even the Japanese on the deck of the Missouri, they were expecting vengeance. And there was 9 representatives that were on the deck, and they said when they heard MacArthur's speech, they realized that none of that was going to take place. They realized that the deck of the Missouri had been turned basically into an altar of peace. Because if you read it like it is, it's almost like Gettysburg Address, with malice towards none. I mean, the Potsdam Declaration had said they were going to address war criminals, have trials, things like that, but the goal was not to subjugate or make the Japanese slaves. It was to reform them and bring them back into the community of nations.
And the Japanese, we're talking about, 15 years since 1930 or so of just...
Yeah, I think since the early 30s when they had gone into Manchuria and created Manchukuo. And so that was really the beginning of the Asia-Pacific War.
And there were some really horrific acts that we witnessed.
Very
over
much
this
so.
time.
Yes, and pretty much the whole world of Asia understood it. I mean, there's 66 million dead in World War II, and half of those are in the Pacific.
Wow, that was pretty. And MacArthur, of course, had a legacy in the Pacific before this time.
He had been very much aligned with the Philippines, as his father was. His father was a very famous general himself. He was there during the Spanish-American War. A lot of people that knew the father, when Douglas MacArthur first came there in the early 1900s, they all immediately, warmed up to him because they all knew the dad.
Right.
And so then he'll spend 3 tours there. He does do a tour of Japan with his father in 1905, 1906. And so he had an understanding of what Japan was like. He had done a complete tour throughout Asia as a young officer. And the United States Army pretty much considered him the most knowledgeable officer about Asia.
How did Hampton Roads and Norfolk embrace MacArthur when they were building his museum here? Politically, I mean, he was not a Democrat, right? He was
Right.
He was Republican. This was a very Democratic area. I
Yeah.
mean, was there any animosity at all?
There was
or?
there was some problems over using tax money. Some people were upset about that, and so we have the records about all the different phases that went through creating the memorial. There was a lot of people that were really worried about segregation. Was this going to be a segregated place? And MacArthur said, if it's going to be segregated, I don't want it to be built. I don't want any part of it.
And this was 1951.
No, 1960.
Okay,
that this is
1960.
created. And
The height of the civil rights era.
And it was basically the only place in Hampton Roads that you could come that was desegregated. In the early 1960s.
Did not know that.
Yeah.
So that was an unpopular position to take amongst a lot of the locals. here.
Amongst many, but I think it was more in the sense of the African American community. They wanted to make sure that this was going to be for everyone, and MacArthur was very much behind that. And like I said, there was many people that were worried because of different flavors within the politics of government at that time. But MacArthur was dead set on that.
Okay, that's really something special. When you look at all the artifacts here, it's amazing. We have the Jeep, we have, I think a staff car over here.
Right.
Can you tell us something about those?
Well, the car that is the 1951 Chrysler Imperial, that's the one that he had in Japan. It was a U.S. Army car. He had a Cadillac there before that had lasted from the pre-war period. It had been brought from the Philippines after it was discovered there at the end of the war, and it was brought to Japan, and MacArthur used that until about 1950, and then he got this Chrysler sedan. Now, after the war, or after he got fired, he was in New York, and he still used that car. They brought it back from Japan, and he had drivers that took him all around New York City. And then after this location was created, it was brought here, and it sat in the old annex because it was just the old City Hall building that was the MacArthur Memorial, and it had an annex built on the side of it, and the car was in there with a small theater at that time, 1964.
And the Jeep behind us?
That was given to us by Chrysler in about the late 1990s when they were doing the restoration of the museum.
So this is not an authentic Jeep that MacArthur...
Right, yeah, no, it's one that was given by Chrysler later on.
And one that represents a Jeep that he may have driven in.
Right, yeah. The numbers on it are one that he had in the Philippines, but it's not the one.
I'm having too much fun here. We're going to take a little quick break, and we're going to come back, and when we do, we'll talk more about the surrender ceremony itself and the pageantry behind that, so don't go away. Welcome back. Tom Schaad here with Jim Zobel at the MacArthur Memorial, and this is History Through the Lens. We're talking about the 80th anniversary of the surrender of the Japanese in World War II. We've had so many major anniversaries over the past 18 months or so.
Sure.
D-Day, and of course VE Day, and the atomic bomb that was dropped. There's 2 atomic bombs that were dropped on Japan. Can you set the scene for us for the surrender, the big ceremony? How big was this? I mean, if we were to watch this on television, what would it have been like?
Well, everybody been watching it, that's for sure. The German surrender had taken place at night, and there was no big audience or anything like that. And it was almost like it was hidden away. And the United States government didn't want that to happen with Japan. They wanted everyone to know that they had surrendered, officially to the United States and to the Allies at that time. So the government wants this in broad daylight. They want it filmed. And then Truman wants it on a U.S. battleship. And this will represent the joint effort of the United States Navy and the United States Army, because it'll be on a United States Navy battleship, but MacArthur will preside over the ceremony as the Supreme Commander of the Allied powers. They picked the USS Missouri because Truman is from Missouri.
Right.
And that's what will happen. Then MacArthur has elements on his staff, like this Colonel Herbert Whipple, that will be his liaison with the Navy. And they work out all the details of how they'll get the Japanese out to the ship in Tokyo Bay, where it will all take place on that starboard deck of the United States Missouri. And so it's, again, a joint effort of Navy as well as Army planners to make this turn out the way it does.
300 ships in the Armada that came in. I mean,
I don't know the exact number, but it's all of the Third Fleet almost. You've got a great deal that are inside Tokyo Bay, and then you've got as well the elements, aircraft carriers that are outside in case anything goes wrong.
And what must that have looked like if you were in the Japanese contingent?
Power. It looks like you've been completely wiped out and taken over. The Japanese had never been conquered by anybody. They'd never had anybody occupy the place. This is something completely different. And they had been completely destroyed by the strategic bombing campaign. I think we erased 66 cities, and I mean erased. And then 2 cities are wiped out by atomic bombs. You've got the United States Navy right on the coast blasting them right in those last final days. And then here comes the entire U.S. fleet right inside the bay, right outside of Tokyo.
And that must have been even almost as difficult for them.
Oh, yeah.
To see this.
It's a hard
this is
thing.
The final nail in the coffin.
And you got to, there's a lot of trepidation about what are the Americans going to do, because they've made them out to be complete and total ghouls, and they're expecting the worst of the worst, and it doesn't happen. They get a fair shake.
And that's interesting, because the surrender was the beginning of I guess, it was a new beginning for Japan, could you say?
Yeah, it was an occupation that the Potsdam Declaration had said Japan would be occupied. The Americans were going to, it was supposed to be allied, but it's really an American occupation. And they come in and reform the government, reform the bureaucracy, reform the education, reform land reform, everything, and trying to turn what they thought was this feudal society into a modern society. They were trying to get rid of those militarist traditions that had been ingrained into the whole society of Japan from about the early 1930s to about 1945.
Let's go back to MacArthur for a second, because and I hate to keep using the word controversial, but I believe even selecting him to preside over this was somewhat controversial within some of the brass.
Well, a lot of people expected
military.
Nimitz to take it. It really comes down to, I think, this guy named Leif Sverdrup. Sverdrup is the guy who builds the Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel. It's his engineering firm. But he was an engineer under MacArthur, and he built all those airfields in New Guinea and across all of that Southwest Pacific area. He was from Missouri, knew Truman. Truman was going to ask him to take over as Secretary of War, and has him at the White House just a couple of days before he makes the decision. And Sverdrup says he convinced Truman to pick MacArthur. Does Truman regret that decision later on? We don't really know.
Maybe in Korea.
but that's the decision that's made, and it is a wise choice. MacArthur has vast experience with people and with situations. He had been in the Allied occupation of Germany after World War I, so he's very much well versed on what they. And he's not anybody that has any qualms about taking power immediately and using it. Because when they announce him as Supreme Commander of the Allied powers, they really don't have any kind of, okay, this is your stipulations of how you'll do things, and he's just got it all ready to go. And that's just the kind of guy he was.
Yeah, I mean, there was also, too, kind of a, could you say, correct me here if I'm wrong, but a diplomatic side, an art of diplomacy.
Oh, very
that he
much
carried
so.
with him.
MacArthur
Not just all military.
is a very persuasive person. And as the Japanese said, he never ordered them really to do anything. It was, okay, we're going to do this. How do you think about it? You know, this is what we're going to do. They talk, you know, this is what Prime Minister Yoshida said, who worked with MacArthur all through the occupation, that they would get together, talk over things, then MacArthur would make a decision and say, this is what we're going to do. And Yoshida said he never ordered me. He wanted the Japanese to do it all. So then when it's over, they didn't just say, oh, the Americans made us do that. You know, he gave it up to them to be able to decide what they were going to do.
And MacArthur made the final choice.
Yes. I mean, there's a lot of goofy things that goes on. There's a lot of bad decisions that are made of what they're going to implement, but it's very fair-minded, and that's because of MacArthur.
Could describe his presence. I know that that's a very basic question, but the presence he had on the stage, or that day especially.
Well, I'll give the Brigadier General Edward Simmons was the head of Marine Corps history. He had fought in World War II. He had been in Korea at Incheon as a young officer. At Incheon, you're there with all the Marine brass. You're there with all the Navy brass. And then MacArthur walks on the field. And Simmons said, at that point, there was no other officer on the field. He looked like he was 10 feet tall, in total control, and that's the way people perceived it. Lord Mountbatten, who was head of the Southeast Asia Command, had never met MacArthur and had heard all the bluster and the news and everything else. So he comes to see MacArthur in Manila, and they're in the office together. And Mountbatten's like, I don't get it. This guy's a college professor. He's not like the great military person. What's going on here? And he said, then they left the office, and he went out first. And he said MacArthur followed behind him. And when he came out, he had that hat on. Total different person. Said, was that the guy I was just with in the office? And so, as you said, actor, dramatic flair, he's got it all. You know, he does. He has it all.
We're going to take a quick break and come back with the legacy of Douglas MacArthur, especially here in Norfolk and in Hampton Roads, after this. Back with History Through the Lens, coming up on the 80th anniversary of the Japanese surrender in World War II, and Douglas MacArthur presiding over that. That's why we're at the Douglas MacArthur Museum here in downtown Norfolk with Jim Zobel. And I pulled out another quote here because I found this fascinating from the surrender ceremony itself back on September 2nd, 1945. If we do not devise some greater and more equitable system, Armageddon will be at our door. MacArthur said that. It sounds like something you'd hear someone say today, especially the word equitable system. What did he mean by that?
Well, MacArthur had just seen 2 atomic bombs, wipe out these 2 cities, and he knew that everything's changed. The world has completely changed. And he knows now that it's not just the nation's militaries which are at risk, it's their civilian populations. And he does see that as a complete change in world history, a paradigm shift, basically. He'll talk, I think he gives maybe 6, 7 speeches of how somehow mankind has to find a way to abolish war after that. In the Japanese Constitution, he inserts Article 9, which is that the Japanese will not be able to solve any problems by warfare. They've adhered to that 80 years now. He believed that Japan would be like an example for the rest of the world to follow.
Including us?
Yes, everyone, But Korea changes a lot of that, because he sees that there's not going to be any mediating with the communists. We're still at it today. 80 years later, here we are still stuck in the same problems. Basically the Pacific has not changed geopolitically or strategically since he got fired in 1951. And I think he saw that nothing had changed. That those problems that mankind has in its brain or whatever it is, that some people like violence, some people like to take from everybody else.
And so you fight violence with violence?
And so I think that's what he saw it as.
Yeah.
You have to eradicate it. But that's time on the Missouri. Yeah, I think he thought about that. In 1955, he'll give another speech about how mankind has to find a way to get out of this, mindset of constantly battling and constantly fighting each other.
Cold War really taking off at that point.
Yes.
Of course, with we had the duck and cover and the shelters and all those things. But he also, if I'm not mistaken, in 1951, before he was fired for wanting to expand the war, the Korean War, did he advocate the use of nuclear weapons at that point?
Not during the war.
Okay.
He never did. No, and he didn't want to. He didn't want Americans to go into China. After the war, when Eisenhower is going to come in to be president, he sees that this thing is not going to end, and he goes to Eisenhower and he says, "Look, the Russians, they only trust you, or they only look to you with any kind of respect whatsoever. Go to them right now. Tell them to get out of East Germany. We'll get out of West Germany. Tell them to get out of Korea. We'll get out of Korea. And if they don't want to do that, we'll end the war in Korea tomorrow by dropping 30 to 50 atomic bombs."
Armageddon.
Yeah. Well, if you look at it, when the war ended in Korea in 1953, the head of strategic air was Curtis LeMay. Mm-hmm. And they fully well figured that the Chinese would start the war again, as well as the North Koreans. And Curtis LeMay was ready to drop 300 to 500 atomic bombs on that area. So
the character in
crazy
Dr.
is
Strangelove.
as crazy is.
What was it? The Sterling Hayden's character in Dr. Strangelove was based on Curtis LeMay, wasn't it? That's a different topic. We're going off on that a little bit.
But that's what he means by the
Sure.
Armageddon will be at our door. And I think that, we've been living under that sword of Damocles ever since.
And we're not out of the woods yet, are we?
No, we're far from it.
Yeah, especially with what's happening in the Middle East, and that's a whole different conversation. But MacArthur's legacy here in Hampton Roads, I mean, his name is everywhere.
Yeah.
And of course he's buried here with his wife. And, what does he mean to Norfolk, and what does he mean to Hampton Roads?
It's amazing because it's the biggest naval base in the world, and you have this 5-star general that's buried here.
That's right.
But the wisest thing he did was knowing that, because you look at it now, most everybody that comes here, they were born after he was dead already. I mean, the veterans from World War II, Korea, they're very few now. And he knew that this would be a place that needed to be something more than just things on a pedestal or things in a case. It needed to have that educational quality. And that's what we are. And I think that's what Hampton Roads looks at us now, as this educational resource because of the vast amount of materials that are within the
Free
library and archives.
Walk in
and as well, he had said that you will not be able to charge a dime. No, I don't know what the city of Norfolk thinks of that. But he knew it. He knew it would be like Grant's Tomb in New York that nobody goes to. And this isn't that. I mean, we're still attracting 100,000 people a year.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah, and I think it's a big asset to the city of Norfolk, and I think the city of Norfolk understands that.
And I think we live in an area that does appreciate history just by virtue of, we're in Virginia, for crying out loud.
Very much so.
The American Revolution, the Civil War, it all plays out. Slavery, everything kind of plays out in Virginia. So yeah, this has been fantastic. So what's next for the memorial and the museum?
Well, it's always in movement, that's for sure.
Certainly is.
The city has invested a lot of money to redo the dome, as well as the outside of the 1850 City Hall Courthouse. Wow. We have very many events on our schedule to come up. I'm still getting 2,000 to 3,000 research requests a year from around the world, so nothing has slowed down. And we're going full force.
You always have wonderful guests that come in here, Holocaust survivors. I mean, just keeping the legacy alive so people don't forget the past.
Sure. And with things, as we just talked about, you look at the end of the Napoleonic Wars in 1815. Europe didn't really have a big conflagration for another 100 years. And that's because everybody who finally remembered the Napoleonic Wars was dead. And the horror of those wars was forgotten. They looked at the glamour, the pageantry. And so when they go into World War I, it's going to be this grand, glorious thing. Right. And you find out again. So it's basically you have to remember it so you don't forget the horror that is still there.
We're not doomed to repeat it.
Yes.
That is a great way to end this wonderful conversation. Jim Zobel from the MacArthur Memorial. This is History Through the Lens, and thank you for joining us today.